Welcome back, Global War at 1939. We're going to look into the Empire of Japan and go into a more in-depth look at this particular nation, and just give you the pros and cons, and just take a deeper dive into their capabilities. When it comes to this particular nation, this is the country that is the most, for me personally, it's the most exciting and frustrating nation to play at the same time. Because just their starting territories, their starting locations give you a swath of a bunch of different opportunities on your opening round, and there's multiple different places that you can go. Unlike the European axis, you kind of got to do almost the same thing every game, but the Empire of Japan is a little more forgiving in that regard. There's actually a bunch of different strategies. I usually fall back on three different kinds, which makes it exciting. But at the same time, if you're trying to establish your empire and make it grow, if it doesn't work out the way you want it, it can be quite frustrating. And yes, you are trying to achieve certain goals. There's a bunch of different territories that, in my opinion, is a must to capture and to bring over on your side. But once you achieve that, it gets to the point where the Japanese become unstoppable. They just make too much money. Their navy's too big. But up until that point, until you get to that stage, which, if you do everything properly, it's probably a turn 6, turn 7 time frame that you're looking at. So it's very nerve-wracking up until that point. But once you establish yourself in that point, you're unstoppable. Japan is a very exciting nation. So let's take a look and see their capabilities. So let's first take a look at their national objectives. They have a number of them. They have about average, I would say. The Germans have more. The Germans have about 6 that they can tap into to get extra income. The Japanese only have 4, but some of them are double dipping. For example, one of their national objectives, they get +5 for 3 if they control any 3 victory cities. So to be +5 for each of the following victory cities under Japanese control, which would consist of Singapore, Calcutta, or Sydney. Now, that's massive. If you're able to achieve all 3 of those, that's +15. So it's 5 for each. Now, out of the 3 of them, Singapore is 100% the easiest to get, which is just down here. So this is 100% the easiest one to get. To get Calcutta, there is an opening strategy that you can go straight for Calcutta. Turn 3 should be under your control, so you get a +5 from there. However, there is an allied counter to that maneuver, so you want to be careful. The other objective would be Sydney, which is down here in Australia. Again, you get your +5. But when it comes to these, if you go with that strategy to either take out Sydney or Calcutta, regardless, you're going to go after Singapore, no matter which city that you go after for your opening maneuver, if you're going down that route. So you'll get 2 of them. To get all 3 at the same time, man, that would be super difficult. You can get one or the other plus Singapore, which would still give you a +10. The other national objective, they get +7 if Japan controls all Chinese territories on the continent of Asia, including Hong Kong, Korea, French Indochina, Saigon, and all of the Communist China territories. So that's a lot. So what they mean by that is, if you see all these green territories, you have to capture all that. These 2, Korea needs to be under your control, and you need both of these French territories. So if you're able to achieve that, which You know, China mostly only has infantry, but where they have a defensive fort, it's a slogfest. You for the Japanese to take all of China, you'd have to put some effort into it. It's not easy. Don't think, the Chinese only got infantry. But when you're facing 20 infantry, and then the follow-up territory has another 10, the follow-up has another 8, it's just a slogfest. But if you're able to achieve that, it is a +7. That's a big deal. That's probably, this national objective is probably one of the highest in the game. So basically, what I mean is, if you can achieve it, great, fantastic. It gives you your economic boost, like a massive economic boost, because all these green territories are worth 12. That's another 3. That's another 4 for the French territories, plus the $7 bonus. Like, it's a huge economic boost. But in order to achieve it, you need to put some effort into it. You need to get a lot of ground forces. And with the Japanese, they're a unique country where they need to balance their income between their Navy, Army. They certainly rely on their Air Force. So their income is being pulled in multiple different directions. So it can be quite difficult. And if you ignore one to favor the other, yes, you'll dominate on land, but then the Navy gets killed. So you want to be careful. You get a +1 for each of the following territories under Japanese control, which is Hong Kong, Burma, Sichuan. Now, Sichuan is this territory here. More likely, if this is under Japanese control, the rest of China is under your control. Like, this is, for China, this is their last territory that they're going to defend. You can consider this their capital. They don't have a factory, but this is definitely their capital. And if you control this, you probably own all this, which then leads you into that $7 bonus. But they get $1 for this. Hong Kong is going to fall pretty early, so you get $1 for that. And then Burma, you want to come into Burma anyways, early. It does a couple things. Well, you get the $1 for the territory, $1 bonus, plus it closes off the Burma Road, which is an objective for China, which reduces their economic base. So coming to Burma should be a priority. You definitely want Hong Kong. It's a victory city, worth $2 plus a $1 bonus. And then their last objective, and national objective to get extra income, is you get +5 if Japan controls all of the Pacific Island territories, which include Dutch East Indies, Borneo, Burin, Sumatra, Celebes, Java, Guam, and the Philippines. That's a lot. That's quite a bit of territories. Now, normally, when we talk about this objective, we are talking about, and we'll usually define it as the money islands. That's what we normally call it. So what this national objective is saying is you need to own all these five islands, plus Philippines, plus Guam. Now, how I usually approach this, I want this objective to get the +5 every game. I want all these territories. It's worth a lot of money. 4, 1, 2, 3. There's a couple of naval bases, a couple of air bases. So it extends the range, gives you a more economic base, and getting these islands should be a priority. So my focus on turn 2 to 4 is to capture all these. And I want to do it as fast as possible. Now, you still don't get your bonus until Philippines and Guam are under your control. Now, of course, you're not going to take these out right away. You're going to wait until the Americans either join voluntarily or their economic base is close enough to 80 that you're like, yeah, they're going to join next turn. So then what you'll do is preemptively attack. Like, if the Americans are sitting at their income at 76, well, at that point, you know that they're going to join voluntarily the next turn. So just go ahead, take these out. You'll get one extra turn of $5. Now, Guam is usually a walk-in. Philippines can be quite difficult. If you wait too long, they do have a military base, so they'll put in infantry. And if you wait till, like, you know, turn 6, turn 7 to attack it, you'll have a good number of infantry you have to deal with. You have to pour in a lot of resources. So there is a case to be made to take it early because the defense won't be as strong. There is also a fort here, so the potential to take out Philippines could be easy or it could be hard. Depends on how long you wait. The defenses down here, usually there will be 2 infantry here, two here, 1 here. This is empty. This is empty. So 2 of the islands are just walk in. The other 3 you'll have to fight. So definitely good idea to take this out to get that objective. So that's all their national objectives. They only really got 4 that they can rely on. But 2 of them are big money makers. Like if you could get all 3, or if you're able to take out all 4 FEC cities in this area of the map in the Pacific, so that'd be Hong Kong, Singapore, Calcutta, Sydney, that pretty much would eliminate FEC from your region of the map and give you a huge economic boost. If you take out all 4, that's $16, 1 for Hong Kong, 5 for each of the other ones. So you definitely want to put some focus there. And then if you take out FEC, then all you really got to deal with is China and the US. So you wanted to focus on one enemy and then go after another enemy. If you take on too much all at once, you'll be overwhelmed. Now, the political situation for the Japanese at the beginning of the game, they are at war. They're actually one of few countries that start the game at war. Everyone else starts the game at peace, and then everything kicks off in Europe. But they start the game at war with only China. So they're at war with the KMT, they're at war with the Communist China. So you can freely attack these 2 nations without any kind of triggering any kind of special rule effect. So now when it comes to Russia itself, like I said, you're at peace. If you attack Russia, there is the Mongolia rule in this game, and you don't really want to trigger that. It's not good, actually. So basically, what would happen if Japan attacks Russia unprovoked? Then Mongolia will align itself with Russia. Now, Mongolia itself is only worth $2, so you're giving your enemy Russia an extra source of income. Not a lot, but some. More importantly, outside of that, they get the standing army. And it opens up Chahar, this territory here, to an attack. Otherwise, the Russians have to come through here. And you don't want to do that. Don't do that. Now, if you wait and don't attack Russia, and if Russia attacks you, then what that does, this is what you want. This is a scenario that you want play out. Russia attack Japan. This completely negates the Mongolia rule for the rest of the game. So no matter what, Mongolia is going to stay neutral, no matter how much these guys fight, unless you, as Japan, actually attack it, then it'll stand up. But if you ignore it and don't do anything, it'll stay neutral the entire game, which is what you want. And if Russia preemptively attacks Japan, then Japan gets 5 free infantry, automatically pops up in Tokyo for free. So that's $15 worth of equipment that you don't have to spend, right? And early game, Japan's income, like they want every dollar, like every dollar is super valuable early game, right? And if you get $15 worth of free equipment, why not? But all that means then you have another nation to fight. So you got to be careful, right? So now we do have to talk about early game positioning. There's a couple of places on the map, like Japan is under a fair amount of restrictions when it comes to their navy, what territories they can attack before they're at war with the Commonwealth, before they're at war with the US. So you want to be very careful on where you move things. So when it comes to their navy, any territory that's bordering the US, excluding 106. So in this scenario, we're not including 106 because this is considered Japanese waters. But when it comes to the Navy, you can move through these sea zones. That's fine. But you cannot end your turn in these sea zones. So what we're talking about is sea zone 92, 107, 93, 108, 118, 128, 120, 115, 110, and of course 133, 140, 139. You cannot end your turn in these areas. You could, I guess, but then at the moment you end your turn and you have naval warships in these sea zones, you're immediately at war with the Americans. This is considered a declaration of war from Washington. They've already told you up front, do not enter these waters. If you do, you're automatically at war. And you don't want to go to war with the US unless you're able to achieve a military might. Like if you're going to attack the US and drag them into the war, make it big. Attack them in a big area, weaken them, attack their navy, take out the Philippines, take out Guam. You want to do all that at once. But if you just, say, send a battleship to Sea Zone 118 and don't do anything with their territories, well, now you're at war for no reason. So you want to be extremely careful what you do with your navy. Like I said, you can move through the water. So if you have a fleet here and you want to get down to Pabloo in Sea Zone 94, that's totally fine. You can go 1, 2, you end your turn here. But if you end it here, you're at war. So you want to be careful. Now, when it comes to FEC, these Dutch territories, even though, so typically what will happen, German will take out Holland, right, the territory, and then what happens at that point, all these territories become pro-Allied neutral. So meaning that any Commonwealth unit can walk in and annex these territories. Now, just say an Australian comes in here, they don't, if they annex this, they're not automatically annexing everything else. They actually got to get a man in each territory to annex it. But if the even though they're considered neutral, they're pro-Allied neutral. So as soon as, say, Japan came in here and captured this territory and ignored all this, well, now that's a declaration of war against the Commonwealth. So you can't enter here any of these territories until you're ready to go to war with the Commonwealth. So you want to be careful. Same thing goes with, obviously, the Australian territories, FEC. But just because you look at the map and you're like, oh, these are all neutral, I just come in here without triggering war, that's not the case. These are considered pro-Allied neutral, pro-FEC, pro-Commonwealth, okay? You want to be very careful. Now, pre-war, before you're at war with the FEC, the Americans, the territories that you're allowed to go in without escalating world tension, of course, all of China, because you're already at war with them, and the French territories. You can come in, even if once Paris falls, and these align to the Allied, say both these align to Allied, and you attack them, that's fine. You're still not triggering war. Even though these, you'll have an Allied roundel on these territories to signify that yes, these are now belong to the Commonwealth. You can really consider these as not part of the Commonwealth, but an ally of the Commonwealth. And if you come in and attack them, the Allied or the Commonwealth won't consider that an act of war, right? So that's pretty much the only territories they can go in without escalating the war. Everywhere, anywhere else in the Pacific, you're surrounded by, in the South, surrounded by Commonwealth. In the East, you're surrounded by the Americans. North is the Russians. So really, West is the only direction that you can go if you don't want to escalate things. Okay, so now Japan has a couple special rules, special abilities, things that are only unique to the Japanese. They actually have a number of them. They have some of they're not complicated, but they have some of the most special rules, special abilities in the game. One you'll use on a defensive posture is called Dug in Defense. Basically, all Japanese infantry units, it's only for the infantry, so this doesn't include tanks or artillery. All Japanese infantry units defend at a +1 on all original Japanese territory. So if you got, say, 5 infantry in northern Manchuria, infantry normally defend at a 4, and they would need a fort to give them the +1. Now, if Russia comes into northern Manchuria, they automatically are defending at a 5. So that's a big deal. Let's assume your strategy is to build up your navy, go after the Americans, and you're not putting any money in your army, and you're not expanding here, and you're going to wait to expand here later on once you're dominant in the water. If that's your strategy, then you want a lot of conscript or normal infantry to defend your borders where they get a +1. So Dug in Defense is a big deal. It's an easy one for people to forget, but you take advantage of it. And that goes for all original territories. That includes these islands. So you want to hold on to all your islands. This ability makes it much harder for the Allies to come and take territory, your original territory. Now, if you say come into Hong Kong and the Chinese come in and attack you, you don't get the +1. It's only your original territories. Okay? Now, another ability, which is really good ability, this is like an amazing, it's called Banzai Attack. So basically how this rule works is Japan can declare up to 3 territories. So 3 different attacks. So let's say you're attacking these 3 territories. Okay? And you declare, hey, I'm making a Banzai attack. You have to verbally declare it so everyone knows what you're doing. Up to 2 infantry per battle may attack at a +1 on the first round of combat. Now, it has to be regular infantry. You cannot apply this to your veterans, your airborne, your special naval landing force, only your regular infantry. They'll get a +1, so instead of attacking at a 2, they're now attacking at a 3. But the drawback is you cannot retreat. You're committed to the battle, right? So let's say you come in here, you declare Banzai, and after 2 rounds of combat, for example, you figure, oh, I'm probably going to lose this, I should back out. Well, you can't because you made it a Banzai attack. You're committed to the fight until the bitter end, whoever wins. So that's kind of the drawback, but certainly use it in situations where you know, oh, this is almost a guaranteed win. I just need that slight edge. I just need that one extra bump. Then go ahead and use it. Banzai, when I play, I haven't used it a lot. I'll use it a couple times, but not a lot. Tokyo Express is another great ability. Certainly go ahead and use it as much as you can. So now the Tokyo Express, the Japanese player is the only country that can actually use this ability. So during the actual war, the Japanese Empire, they commissioned some of their smaller war vessels. These are ships that were designed for war, to fight, but they also used them as cargo ships. And they moved material and men around. It seemed like super fast, like the Allies were looking at it at this and be like, man, how are they moving so much stuff around all the time? Well, it's because of this. So if we're in the game, how we're going to represent this is if you pair 2 destroyers together, you can move 1 infantry as if it was a transport. Only 1 infantry for 2 destroyers. So if you have, say, 6 destroyers here, then you can move 3 infantry. However, the drawback is you can only use this ability in the non-combat phase. So it's not like you can take 3 destroyers. No, 6 destroyers. Yeah. Say you had 6 destroyers moving 3 infantry. You can't come down here and attack this territory. It has to be in the non-combat phase. So what you do, you would have your soldiers here attack this territory, and fight, win, whatever. You're good to go. In the non-combat phase, again, assuming you have 6 destroyers, you can come down here, offload 3 infantry in the non-combat phase. Right? So it's a great way to reinforce this area of the map from Japan, because Japan Island starts the game with a number of infantry, and you want them to get it here as fast as possible, or other areas of the map. And you start with 6 transports. Well, let's assume they're off doing other things. You still got more material to move around. Well, now you can use your destroyers to do that. Great ability. I use it all the time. Lean into it if you're the Japanese player. Now, another ability that the Japanese Empire was famous for was the Kamikaze Fighter. Now, it's an ability that I normally never use, but it's certainly there if you want. So how this rule works is starting on turn 10, you cannot trigger this rule up until turn 10 onward. So if you're in turn 8 and you're trying to do this, that's not on. It has to be round 10 onward. Starting in round 10, up to 3 fighters per turn may kamikaze. So it's not like you can buy 10 fighters and throw them to the wind and use them in this ability. It's only 3 per turn. Kamikaze fighter can move to maximum range, ignoring the landing rules. Normally, when a plane engages in battle, it's just a bombing raid or whatever that you're doing, you must have a legal landing spot either on land or an aircraft carrier. If you're using this ability, you can ignore the landing rule. So it certainly brings out your range. You can attack units that are normally impossible for you to attack because they're just too far away. The Kamikaze has target select and hits on a roll of 8 or less. So your fighters normally hit at a 6. But now, because they're using this ability, their attack value is increased to an 8. And you gain the target select. So you can, once you land your hit, so to say you roll 5, then you're the one as the attacker choosing your target. Normally the defender chooses its target, so that's a big advantage. Yeah, so you hit at 8 or less, but you can only hit surface naval warships. So you cannot go after subs this way or transports. But certainly cruisers, battleships, aircraft carriers, they're all fair game. And I wouldn't really worry about the sub. You're not going to use this ability to kill a sub. That'd be nonsense. So it has to be surface warships. So like I said, battleships are a good target. Aircraft carriers would be an amazing target. Cruisers, whatever you want. And the defender does not get to roll in defense. So normally when you make your attack, the attacker does all the rolls. The defender rolls back at you. You remove your casualties. So when using this ability, there's no defense dice. Every kamikaze plane is destroyed after being utilized for this purpose. You cannot use your veteran fighters for this ability. It only applies to fighters. Okay. So a great ability. It's a good way to say the Americans come at you with whatever battleships, aircraft carriers. Me personally, if I was going to use this, I would prioritize carriers over battleships, because let's assume there's a Navy, an American Navy here in this sea zone. Use a kamikaze, say, to target one of the aircraft carriers, and you land the hit successfully. Now, normally, so then the aircraft carrier ain't actually destroyed. It would take a damage hit. However, now the planes on the aircraft carrier got nowhere to land. If a carrier is hit, the planes get one range of movement to land somewhere. And if there's not another empty carrier or whatever, they get hit. If you go after a battleship, of course, the battleship takes the damage, and is not really not as effective moving forward. And of course, a cruiser would just be outright destroyed. So this is a good ability. You can use it up to 3 times per turn. So if you're desperate enough and your income's starting to slip and you're past round 10, it's a good way to take out bigger targets that are normally protected behind smaller screening force. Let's assume the Americans are here. They got 3 battleships, 3 aircraft carriers, but 15 destroyers. Well, you'd have to engage that Navy, kill all the destroyers before you'll start taking hits on the capital ships. This is the way you can get around those screening force, destroyer, subs, whatever, to go after the bigger targets, right? But you can only use that ability in round 10. So this leads us into the one of the greatest abilities that the Japanese can actually use. All these other abilities, they're all pretty decent. They'll all certainly help you. Tokyo Express, Dug-in Defense, Bonsai Attack, I use them almost every game. Kamikaze, maybe not, maybe. But the other ones, definitely using all the time. The sneak attack is one of the biggest strengths that you have. It is devastating to your enemies once you engage it. Now, there is an expiry on this ability. You can use it up until turn 5. However, if you say you're at turn 5 and you still haven't used it, then it expires, it's gone, you cannot use it anymore. So there is a time frame on it, so you're under a little bit of pressure to use it. But certainly, by turn 5, most of the world's at war anyways. And if you're not going after the Commonwealth, the Americans, up until that point, then your empire is probably not that big. But if you're going to focus on the first 4 turns into China and really hamper them, and ignore the Commonwealth, well, the downside, if you ignore the Commonwealth too long, then they get their full income every round. Their army is going to be massive. So you're kind of doing yourself a disservice by waiting too long. But either way, this ability expires at the end of turn 5. Another thing to keep in mind when you're using your sneak attack, you can only use it against countries that you're not at war with. So your prime targets is either going to be the Commonwealth, so FEC, Australia, and of course you can use it against Americans if you want to drag them into the war. That's probably where you would want to wait till turn 5, is if you're going after the Americans. But if you're going after the Commonwealth, use it on turn 3. So you cannot be at war. So if you come in and attack Burma on turn 2, well, now you're at war with FEC, you cannot use this ability against them, then you're forced to use it against Americans. As that would be the only nation you're not really at war with. All right, so how you would trigger your sneak attack, the second your turn opens, so as soon as you start your turn, you announce to the table, so all the players involved, you announce, hey, I'm going to use my sneak attack, and you immediately collect an extra $35 on top of whatever income that you have. So let's assume it's turn 3, and your income is at 48. you'll immediately collect another 35, and then you can actually spend it. You don't have to wait till the end of your turn to collect it to spend on the following turn. You spend it right away. So extra $35. If anything else, even if you don't attack a bunch of different territories and weaken your enemy, if anything else, the 35 is worth it. You don't skimp yourself 35 free dollars for no reason. Now, this is where we get into the real heart of the sneak attack. Once they declare they're going to use it, they collect their 35. Japan can select 3 territories on the map, and they attack it. On the first round of combat, the defender does not return fire. They do not return fire. So this is a big deal. Like, this is massive. So you can imagine, for example, say Burma here. Let's say it's turn 3 or 4, whatever. And FEC built up a big army waiting to either help out the Chinese, attack Siam. They're going to do whatever. But let's assume they got, 10 infantry, 2 fighters, 5 tanks, whatever. And then you use your sneak attack ability. You can essentially, wipe out a good chunk of this army, and they don't return fire. Like, that's a lot of dice that are not being thrown back at you. If they had an AA gun here, and you bring in 10 fighters to attack this army, well, the AA gun's not going to do anything. Like, it's massive, right? So, definitely a huge advantage in the opening round. Now, round 2 of combat onward, they will return fire. So if you're going to use this ability, make sure you're bringing in quite a big force so you can get a lot of dice on the opening round to take out as most of your enemy so they don't return fire on you. So that's the heart of this rule. Now, it's also, when you're using your sneak attack, designate the 3 territories that you're going to, some kind of marker. Some people will use dice, any kind of marker to let the rest of the table know, hey, these are the territories that we're using the sneak attack on. All right. And it's just not for land battles. It could also be against the Navy. So let's assume use the sneak attack against the American Navy stationed in Hawaii. That is another great way to eliminate an American or a Navy. So let's assume they're going after the American Navy. They use their sneak attack ability. Say the Americans got a carrier, 2 battleships, and whatever else here. They use their sneak attack like normal. The defender doesn't return fire. And then for every combat round after the fact, all the defending ships get a -2. See, like, that's a big deal. Now, they can't go below 1. So if, say they got a sub here that defends on the 2, it can't go to 0. It'll just get dropped to a 1. So that's the lowest that it'll get. But on a D12, rolling a 1 is not really good. But you can imagine the battleships. They get reduced to a 6. Your cruisers get reduced to a 4. Your destroyers get reduced to a 2. Like, that's a big deal. So you're probably going to win that fight as the Japanese. So you want to use your sneak attack against targets that are big, juicy. It'll devastate your enemy. One very common strategy is to go after Calcutta. Use your sneak attack ability. It takes out FEC's capital. You get their money. Takes out a factory, so they can't produce more units. There is a counter if you're going after India, but it can be difficult to pull off. Depends on what the Japanese are going in with into Calcutta, but it is possible to counter that maneuver. But the initial attack with the sneak attack is devastating to your enemies, and of course you're dragging that country into war with you. So when you use it, make sure you're using it in a manner that will most benefit you. And of course, you can have a layered sneak attack. So, meaning, we'll just use Hawaii as an example. Let's say they have an American Navy and then some former army on the island. So, let's say they got 5 infantry here, for example, and they have their Navy in the water. So, you can declare, hey, I'm going to use my sneak attack to go after the Navy and the land territory. So then you bring in your Navy, use your sneak attack like you normally would, kill it, whatever, and whatever transports you have, then you offload your transports onto the island, and then you're using your sneak attack against those forces as well. So you can layer it up into, this would be considered, technically it's 2 different battles, but it's one big fight, right? So you can use it in that regard as well. So you can be quite clever with how you're using that ability. All right, so this brings us to the Japanese ally. This is the only minor country that Japan has access to. Unlike the European Axis, they have multiple countries that will align with the Axis. For the Japanese, they have Siam. Siam is actually a big deal. You want to annex it as fast as possible. Their standing army is not super impressive. They do get a fighter and a destroyer, so that's something. The territory itself is worth 3, so you move your income, or your home country income gets a +3. So instead of collecting 41 plus whatever additional territories that you capture, it's +3. So that's a big deal. And like the European Axis, Siam also produces for themselves. So every round, a Siamese infantry will pop up, because Siam will collect $3 for itself. All Siamese infantry units will inherit whatever abilities the Japanese get. So that's a big deal. So the infantry that pops up here, for example, they can use the bonsai attack, right? So that's a big deal. And of course, $3 goes to Japan. So you can kind of view this as a $6 bump, right? Kind of, to a degree. Now, one of the drawbacks, let's assume you annex it super early and you're not planning on going after FEC anytime soon. Now, the units in here are kind of frozen, very similar to the Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria units. There's certain criteria that you must meet before you're able to actually move out and attack with these forces in Siam. So that criteria, you must be at war with the Commonwealth. So as soon as you declare war on the Commonwealth, then that's when you can use these units to attack other territories. And of course, a huge target would be Singapore, right? So if you're trying to get to Singapore without using a navy and transports, you have to go through Siam. So Siam is, strategically, it's a big deal. Plus, it's pretty close to FEC Commonwealth. And also what you get when you annex Siam, you get a military base, which is good, because then, say you annex it, and the following turn you're doing your build, Siam, like I said, will give you a free infantry, and then you can build your own infantry down here as well. So you get 2 guys. Of course, that money comes from Japan to get the 2nd infantry. But then on round 3, beginning of round 3, you can upgrade that military base to a minor facility, which is, again, a big deal. So then really you can produce 4 units here, 3 from the factory in Siam, its own unit. And just like the European Axis, the Siam unit that it builds for itself is not counted towards the production limit of whatever facility that you have. So you can get 4 units down here. That's a pretty big deal. So take advantage of it. Siam is a big deal. Annex it fast as possible. Get that aligned to your side. All right, so another thing you want to be aware with the Japanese, your starting income, even though if you add up all of their territories, it equates to 41. Their starting income on round 1 is only 30. So you want to be aware of that and when you're doing your opening purchase, depending on your strategy, there's multiple different strategies that you can endure with the Japanese. There's 3 that I fall back on, but there's certainly more, and I'll leave all that for you to discover on your own. But just be aware, your starting income is much lower than your actual nation's production. Okay? Okay, so this leads us into the Japanese units. We talked about their special abilities, their ally, political situation, their national objectives. So that's a pretty big dive. Let's take a look at their build queue, what's available to them, and when things become unlocked. So let's start with their facilities. Now, their facilities are not as big as the Germans. The Germans actually have access to more facilities than the Japanese. If you just, for example, look at this. The Germans get colonial factories, the Japanese do not. So you want to be mindful of when you're switching from, say you're playing the entirety of the Axis, just be mindful when you're planning out your turn, what you can buy, what you can't compared to other countries. Now, most facilities in the game are from one country to the other. They all operate the same way, for the most part, unless there's like a special rule designated to that one particular nation. But for production facilities, they have access to major complexes. So cost of 30, you can build up to 10 units, but there is a limit on where you can build these. Like, you can't build this major facility in, say, Johar, because Johar only has a production of 1. So you need your production to be, so it needs to be with a level, or the map printed income needs to be 3 or above, unless it's in a territory that already starts the game. Say there's a territory that only has a 2, but it starts with a major factory, then that's fine. But if you're building one, then you need to have a territory that's 3 and above. And then with your minor factory, it has to be 2 and above. So if you're looking at Japan and you're trying to build your minor factory, which has a cost of 12, has a limit of 3, so there's only certain spots you can actually build it, right? You cannot build any factory here. Okay, so your major factory, cost of 30, can build up to 10 units. Your minor factory, cost of 12, can build up to 3 units. Your major factories, that's the facility that you need if you want to build capital ships. So battleships has to be built out of a major. You cannot build a minor facility in, say, Shanghai and build a battleship there. It has to go into major facilities. So just keep in mind of that. And like most nations, they also have access to military bases. There is a limit of 3 on the map, so you can only ever have 3. They cost 4, so they're super cheap to get. So it's a great way to get infantry to the front lines. Under the build, what you can build there is only 1 infantry per turn. So if you have 3, so let's assume you own these 3 territories and you put a military base in each of them, then you get 3 infantry here, much closer to the front lines, instead of having to build them far away and spend time to move them up. So military bases can be quite useful, but just like every other nation, you cannot stack military bases and minor facilities together. So let's assume, say you take Siam, you start with a military base, you want to upgrade it to a minor factory, you remove the military base, put down your minor factory. It's not like you would have both. You can't have both in the same territory. But military bases are quite useful. They also get access to coastal guns. These are defensive weapons. They only cost 3, so they're pretty cheap, but they're static, they can't move, and they're only for defense. But you can get 3 dice at 3 on the defensive roll. It's pretty decent. They get pillboxes, Cost of 3, super cheap to buy. Static defensive weapon. There's no dice involved. It's an auto kill. So say you got your pillbox, which I use this as the representation for it. Say you're on an island of Tujami, 2 American infantry land to take your territory. Well, you got a pillbox. 1 automatically gets killed before the battle even starts. So it is a big deal. They get forts, which most nations do have access to forts. Cost of 15, 2 dice at 5 on defense. But forts are only useful in the opening round of combat. Past that, then there's no effect after the first round of combat. And all infantry get a +1. Up to 10 infantry get a +1 on defense on the opening round. So if you can have a fort and then combine that with your dug in defense, you can see how things start to stack, right? So if you're going to buy a fort, they are expensive. But they also give your enemy on the opening round of combat a -1 on all their attacks. So if you put them in the right location and populate that territory with the right troops, it could be quite devastating. So a prime location to get a fort in Siam would be a good idea. Just like every other nation, they get AA guns. Not really going to go much into that. AA guns cost 6. They can move. They're for defense against airplanes. They also get naval bases, air bases. Naval bases give you a +1 on your movement. They have repair capital ships. Air bases will give you a +1 on your aircraft, allow you to scramble. Now, if you can see by their facilities, the Japanese do not have radar towers. They don't have access to it, unlike the British and the Germans. Radar towers are fantastic for defensive posture when you're scrambling. The Japanese don't have access to it. Don't even think about buying it because you can't. All right, so let's move into their infantry class units. As you can see, they have a number of them. They actually have one of the highest number of infantry types in the map. Now, when it comes to your army units, so meaning tanks, artillery, infantry, the Japanese rely on their infantry more than any other Axis nation. So you're going to want a lot of them. They're great on defense, not so much on attacking, but there's ways to mitigate that. So they have their normal infantry unit. This is the unit that we were talking about with the bonsai attack. That's the unit that you're going to use, normal infantry. Cost of 3, movement of 1, attack of a 2, defense of 4, nothing special. They can be paired with artillery for a +1 on their attack. Veteran infantry. Veteran infantry are great. These are fantastic units, but you only start with 12 on the map. Now, these are a unit that you cannot buy. You start whatever you start with in the game, that's all you'll ever have, right? Now, they're great in supplementing your army, making your army stronger. They have a movement of 1 like all infantry. They have an attack of 3. Like, that's huge. A defense of 5. Again, massive. Comparative to the regular infantry. It could be the difference between winning and losing a battle, potentially. But as soon as you lose one to combat, so you take it as a casualty, that's it. It's gone. You can't replace them. So you want to put them in position where they're going to be protected. So that's the sculpt I use for my veterans. Another great unit that the Japanese have access to are your Special Naval Landing Force. Now, there's no limit or turn limit when you can get these, but you can only build 2 per turn. But they cost 3. So they cost the same as the regular infantry. So if you're going to be like, I want to buy 5 infantry for 15, that's fine. Make sure 2 of them are Special Naval Landing Force. Their attack and defense is the same as the normal infantry. However, they get a +1 when conducting naval offshore. So say you're attacking the Philippines via transport using Special Naval Landing Force to get a +1 on the attack. They can also get paired with artillery. So for the first round, they really get a +2 if you pair it with artillery. So they're a big deal. Past the first round of combat, then they're just normal infantry. If you're going in the land, say you got 5 here and you're attacking here, well, you don't get the +1 because it's not being offloaded from a transport. So they're great. And they're also get a +1 on defense. Say they're defending an island. The Americans are attacking the island. They'll get a +1 on the defense. Just for being Special Naval Landing Force. Like, they're a great unit. Buy 2 every turn. Get as many on the map as you can. They do have Airborne. Airborne costs 4, that's the sculpt I use for Airborne. This is my Special Naval Landing Force. But for the Airborne, now there is a limit of how many you can have. You can only have 2 at any given point. So I would rather to see more. However, historically, the Japanese didn't really have a lot of Airborne comparative to the Americans. They certainly did have some, but comparative to the Allies, not as many. However, their attack and defense, their attack is a 3, defend is a 5. So you get that, you spend an extra $1 for the extra attack and defense. So for an infantry class unit, defending at a 5, fantastic. Get the Airborne, and of course you can use your air transport to get them in the battles. They're a great unit. From there, then we got Cavalry. Cavalry is really a fast-moving unit. Think of it as like a weak tank, I guess. Cost of 4, movement of 2. It can blitz, just like tanks. So that's a pretty big deal. But you can only have 3. Now, the drawback from the Cavalry is they're defensive. They only have a defense of 2. So if you're putting them in a position where you need to defend ground, use your infantry for that. Don't use your Cavalry. They're not really help you out, but they do have an attack of 3. So that's a big deal. Mechs, your Japanese mechanized are just like any other mechanized in the game. Cost of 4, movement 2. They don't have the blitz ability. Attack of 2, defend of 4. So they're just like regular infantry, but they can move faster. But they can also tow artillery to make your artillery move faster. So that's where you're spending the extra $1. You're not spending the $1 for the attack or defense value to get extra. It's the movement that you're spending that extra $1 for. So pretty big deal. Artillery class, they have 3 artillery to choose from. Self-propelled artillery, which I used the red unit to represent that. So cost of 4, movement of 2. They don't become unlocked until turn 6, and you can only ever have 3 of them. So there is a bit of a waiting game before you get them on the map. However, it is considered artillery. It will boost your infantry by +1 on attack, and each unit gives you 2 dice at 2. So the second dice per unit is a pretty big deal. Don't expect to get a lot of hits. Think of them as, suppressive fire kind of thing. But if you do land hits, you have the potential to take out 2 enemies per unit. Pretty big deal. I usually get them out, and the movement of 2 is a big deal. So that basically it'll get your artillery on the map that don't require to be paired with a mech, making your life a little bit easier. Regular artillery, they're standard, nothing fancy about them. Cost of 4, movement of 1, unless paired with a mech, then they get movement of 2. Attack of 3, defense of 4, paired with infantry gives the infantry a +1. So that's their artillery. Oh, and they get heavy artillery as well. Cost of 6. You can only ever have 3, but there's no limit when they become unlocked, so you can start buying them right away. But you ever only have 3. Where they really shine is their stats. They still an artillery, so still boost an infantry. However, 2 dice at 4 for attacking and defense. Like that's a big deal. Like, get these heavy artillery in defensive positions and attacking positions. Heavy artillery are amazing. Their only real drawbacks, you can only ever have 3. But if they were unlimited, that's all I would ever buy. I wouldn't buy anything else besides these. They are amazing. A little bit expensive, do cost 6. So now let's get into the Japanese tanks. As you can tell, we only have 3 here. Unlike the Germans have access to 5. The Japanese tanks are they're a little lackluster. However, they do have some good abilities. Now, they're light tank. Japanese tanks are actually really expensive, so that's why you don't see a lot of them comparative to the Germans. The German tanks are pretty cheap, actually. But their light tank costs 6, movement of 2, attack and defense of 4, unless paired with tactical, then their attack gets increased to a 5. But you can have as many as you want. But they're quite expensive, cost 6. That's not that good. Their medium tanks cost 8. Again, very expensive for what you get. Movement of 2, can blitz, like all tanks, of course. Attack and defense of 6, have as many as you want. And when paired with tactical, they get increased to a 7. So, Japanese medium tanks are one of their stronger offensive weapons, but the cost of 8 limits them how many that you would want to get. They are very expensive. Now, this is where the Japanese tanks really shine. It's the amphibious tank. So I'm using this unit here to represent it. Cost of a 6, so it's the same as a light tank. Their stats are technically 4 and 4 for attack and defense. They don't become unlocked till round 4, but you can have as many as you want past that. So you can plop down 10 in one go if you do wish. 6 is expensive for a light tank. However, what you get is that when you're offloading via transport onto islands, you get +1. They can also be paired with your Special Naval Landing Force to give them a +1, similar to artillery. So you can imagine going into, say you're attacking Hawaii with 3 amphibious tanks, 3 Special Naval Landing Force. We're boosting each other, giving each other, +1. They're an amazing tank for attacking islands, attacking from transports. But once they're on the land, then they're essentially a light tank. So you just want to be mindful of that. Now, their aircraft, they actually have a lot of different fighters they have access to. Their bombers are the same as anyone else. So they get... Let's take a look at their fighters first. So they get their normal fighter, which is... I use this guy here for it. So their normal fighter, nothing special, cost of 10, movement of 4, attack and defense of 6, as many as you want. They get veteran fighters. Now, very similar to the veteran infantry, this is what I use for the veteran fighters. You start with 5, and that's all you'll ever have. You cannot buy these. You start the game with them. So use them as much as you can. Like I try to use these every single round. They have an attack and defense of 7, so an extra one compared to the normal fighter. So they're great in offensive capabilities. If you put them on your Navy in replace of Zeros or whatever, you put them on aircraft carriers, they're great there. Great in defense. That value of attack and defense of 7 is amazing. Their only drawback is once you lose them, they're gone. Tactical bombers are the same as every other tactical bomber in the game. Cost 11, movement of 4, attack of 7, defense of 5. Get as many as you want. You can pair them with tanks to give your tanks a +1. So tacticals are a pretty big deal. It's probably a good idea to get a few of them. If you're into buying a lot of tanks with the Japanese, start getting tacticals, but that's an expensive endeavor for the Japanese. Zeros are essentially a normal fighter. They're slightly more expensive than your normal fighter. They cost 11 instead of a 10. Their stats of attacking and defense is the same as a normal fighter at 6. However, it has a movement of 5. So that's where you're spending that extra dollar to get that extra movement, which there could be a lot of situations where that extra dollar or that extra movement determines if you win or lose a battle, right? So zeros are a big deal. You start with a number of them. There's no real unlock with them, but you are limited to 8. So it's not like you can just start buying these like crazy. But 8 is a lot, and you start with a fair amount, but you can buy up to 8. That's a pretty big deal. Your torpedo dive bombers cost 12, movement of 4, attack of 7, defense of 5. So they're kind of like your tacticals. However, they do get target select, so that's a big deal. So you want to be mindful of that. They're great if you put them on your Navy. Defense, really not that great, but their attack of 7 is a big deal. And there's no unlock. You can buy as many as you want. Medium bombers, same with any other nation. Cost of 12, range of 6. Attack 2 dice at 4, defend 1 dice at 2. Buy as many as you want. Heavy bombers, they don't become unlocked till turn 9, so they're very late game. So like turn 9 is typically the end of the middle game and the beginning of the late game. You can only ever have 2. They cost 14, but this is where they shine. You get 3 dice at 4. So that's a pretty big deal comparative to the medium bomber. So you get 2 heavy bombers, you put them in a battle with 6 dice for only 2 units. That's a lot. And their range is the same at 6. So turn 9 rolls around, I would certainly try to invest in these units whenever they become available. Air transports, exactly what they are. They just transport infantry around. You pair them with your airborne to get them into combat situations, or just for regular infantry, you can move them in the non-combat phase. Cost of 6, range of 5. You can only ever have 2, and you start the game with 2. So, pretty big deal. Quite handy to have air transports. Now, for their Navy, their Navy standard, except for the Amano class battleship. So they actually have 2 different battleships that you can purchase, and their Amano is a big deal. Get as many as you can. Please buy as many as you can. So they have access to 2 different types of aircraft carriers. They have their normal aircraft carrier or their fleet carrier, which is considered a capital ship. 2 hits to kill. Cost 16, movement of 2. Attack 2, defense 4. Buy as many as you want. However, they can only shoot at planes. So if you say got 5 in a fleet and they're not being protected by destroyers, battleships, whatever, you don't want them on their own, is what I'm trying to say. Have them in a mixed fleet. They'll certainly help out your offensive capabilities, your defensive capabilities because of the planes, but they can only shoot at other planes. So if your enemy attacks you without carriers, and say only cruisers and battleships, or your aircraft carriers, are not really going to do anything for you. Escort carriers, and the fleet carriers can hold up to 2 planes. Escort carriers are a mini version of the fleet carrier. 1 hit to kill, cost of 9, so they're pretty cheap. Like cost of 9 for a fleet or a ship is actually pretty decent. But you can only hold 1 plane. That's really their drawback. Movement of 2, attack of 1, defense of 2, buy as many as you want. So if you're in a pinch and you're like, I really need another carrier somewhere, but I can't afford the 16, the escort carrier might be a good option for you. Battleships, extremely standard. Cost 18, movement 2, attack and defense of 8, buy as many as you want. 2 hits to kill, so it can absorb a hit. If it absorbs a hit, then their stats get reduced to a 6. Now, the Amano class battleship Cost $22. Extremely expensive. However, their attack and defense is 9, so it's increased comparative to the normal battleship. The first hit it absorbs has no effect on its stats. The second hit, all their stats get reduced to a 6. The third hit, it gets killed. So they're quite hard to defeat. They don't become unlocked till round 4, and you can only ever buy 1 per turn. So that's really the only restrictions. Early game, you're not going to see any of these. Mid game is when you'll start seeing these come out. And I typically, when I'm playing the Japanese, I try to get up to at least 4 of these. So as soon as turn 4 to turn 8, I'm buying 1 every turn. And it'll greatly increase your combat effectiveness in your Navy. Cruisers, everything else for the Japanese Navy is extremely standard comparative to the other nations. Cruisers, cost 11, movement of 2, attack and defense of 6. So, you know, think of this as your workhorse ship. You do want a number of them, but you don't want to do too crazy. Destroyers, cost of 7, movement of 2, attack and defense of 4. So this, I would view the destroyers as more, you know, anti-submarine. This is going to be your cannon fodder ship type of deal. So you get a number of those to protect your capital ships. Subs, cost of 6, movement of 2, attack of 4, defense of 2. So defense, they're not good at all. Attacking, they're pretty decent, and they do get the sneak attack ability. Buy as many as you want. Transports, cost of 7, extremely standard. Movement of 2, no attack, defense of 1. Buy as many as you want. With the Japanese, you kind of want, you start with 6. Depending on the strategy that I'm implementing, I'll get up to 10. And because Japan is an island nation, you do want transports to move around quickly, to get units around quickly, to capture as many islands as possible, as fast as possible, and your transports will help you do that. So that's it for, bombardments. These are your ships that you're bombarding with. So your battleship will bombard for a 6, your cruiser for a 4, and destroyers at a 1, a model class, same as a normal battleship. When you're bombarding to soften up the enemy, they have to be paired 1-to-1 with as many ground forces as you're offloading. So if you're offloading 2 infantry and you got 3 battleships, well, you can only use 2 for the bombard because you only got 2 infantry offloading. But if you have 3 offloading, then certainly you can use all 3. Okay. So that's really their Japanese units. This is what they have access to. And so a lot of their units are pretty standard comparative to other nations, but they do have a number of specialized units. Japan likes to heavily lean into their artillery infantry class. Tanks, they're expensive. That's why you don't see a lot of them. But they're amphibious tank, the $6, definitely well worth it. Essentially, they're a light tank, which get a lot of bonuses for attacking off a transport. So invest in them whenever they become available, which ain't till round 4. But that's not really that big a deal. But that is it really for the Japanese. That's the special rules, the units, their income, their political situation. So I'm pretty sure we covered everything. Strategy wise, I'll leave that for you to discover. In this whole series, I'm going to leave all the strategy up to you. I'll just give you the information that you may want to start thinking about what you can do with each country and how you should approach whatever nation that you're playing, either the Axis or the Allies. But the standard 3 would be J1, which is you go to war with everyone right away. Like you attack the Commonwealth right away on turn 1. There are pros and cons to it. Another popular strategy is to go after Calcutta right away. It's pretty devastating to your enemy, gives you a huge bonus. But there are drawbacks. There is also a counter that the Commonwealth can use against you, and they'll see it coming. 2 turns before you actually pull it off. And then Sydney would be another poplar. Semi, no, I wouldn't say super popular, but semi, it's an option. You can go after Sydney instead of Calcutta. But there's pros and cons to that as well. But I'll leave that for you to figure out. All right, well, thank you for watching. Have yourself a great day.